Imagine the following: a colossus of the skies, costing millions of dollars per unit, measuring more than 50 meters in length, weighing almost 300 tons, carrying nuclear and ballistic power of up to 45 tons, and able to cross continents without refueling. Its nickname, the White Swan, its official name, Tu-160. But here's the conflict. How can a bomber conceived in the Cold War in the Soviet Union of the 1970s still today challenge the West's most modern and expensive fighters, such as the F-35 Lightning II? How can a metal giant with almost half a century of history remain, in 2025, the fastest strategic bomber in the world? What makes this aircraft so special? Why does it remain Russia's greatest strategic asset? How does it manage to evade interception, even by the most advanced fighters on the planet? How did it return to flight and modernize after almost being forgotten amid the Soviet collapse? And where exactly does this white ghost project its shadow of fear and respect? The Tu-160 is not just a plane, it is a deterrent weapon, a political symbol, a flying fortress, a legend that survived the fall of its empire and returned more threatening than before. The world changed, but the Tu-160 still flies. And the question now is, where exactly will this white ghost intimidate enemies in the wars to come? The White Swan, Tu-160. The reason. The 1970s, the world was split into two blocks. On one side, the Soviet Union tried to maintain its influence over Eastern Europe, repressing internal dissent and propping up allied regimes. On the other, the United States expanded its global military presence, strengthened alliances through NATO, and strove to keep its technological edge in strategic aviation. In the air domain, the Americans already operated the veteran B-52 Stratofortress, a reliable long-range platform. Yet they sought a technological leap, and thus the B-1A Lancer was born, a deep penetration supersonic bomber designed to fly at low altitude, evade radars, and deliver nuclear warheads with precision. It was a direct response to the Soviet doctrine of layered defense, based on interceptor fighters and surface-to-air missiles. The unveiling of the B-1A put Moscow on alert. Soviet strategic bombers then in service, like the Tu-95 Bear, were robust but noisy and subsonic, easily tracked. The Tu-22M backfire was still under development and lacked the range and payload capacity ideal to confront the American advance directly. Faced with that threat, Soviet leadership recognized an urgent need: design a bomber that would not only rival the B-1, but surpass it in every respect: speed, range, weapons capacity, and strategic presence. An aircraft that would combine cutting-edge technology and destructive power. Everything to become a symbol of the Soviet Union's continuing power in the skies. That is how the idea of the Tu-160 was born, a plane shrouded in secrecy from the start, designed to cross continents and vanish over the horizon before alarms could even sound. A promise that would become a bomber that had to be a threat to the world. The Soviet Union understood that maintaining nuclear parity in numbers was not enough. It was also necessary to project force visibly to confront the rival. The emergence of the B-1A Lancer was not merely an American technical advance, it was a political statement. The Lancer, developed by Rockwell, was conceived as a successor to the B-52 Stratofortress. With variable geometry wings, it could fly long distances economically and at the same time reach supersonic speeds to escape interception. Originally, the B-1A could reach Mach 2, carrying a nuclear arsenal capable of striking the heart of Soviet territory. In the 1980s, the program evolved into the B-1B, with a focus on range and payload. Although its top speed was reduced to Mach 1.2, it gained greater low-altitude penetration capability, becoming practically invisible to the radars of the time. With up to 34 tons of weapons, a mix of conventional bombs and cruise missiles, it established itself as one of the most powerful bombers ever built. The arrival of the Lancer was more than a technological leap, it was a strategic shock. To the Soviets, it embodied a real and existential threat. The USSR's military doctrine, based on strategic depth, relied on vast territory as a natural barrier. But with the B-1 able to cross that space at supersonic speeds and flying at extremely low altitudes, that advantage began to crumble. Action was required. If the United States could launch a surprise attack with cruise missiles fired from virtually undetectable bombers, the entire Soviet retaliation structure would be at risk, and that was unacceptable to the Kremlin. Domestically, the Soviet Union faced growing economic difficulties, yet it kept unrestricted investment in strategic projects. The Kremlin understood that the perception of strength mattered as much as actual strength. Designing a new strategic bomber became a top priority. It was in that context that Tupolev, the traditional bomber design bureau, received orders to create an uncompromising aircraft. The task was not merely to build a fast or lethal plane, it was to build something that would undermine Western confidence. An airplane that would serve both as a vector of attack and as a tool of propaganda, something that, when it took off, would force NATO radars to rethink contingency plans. The mission was clear: develop a bomber capable of reaching any point on the planet, with a payload sufficient to destroy strategic centers, and with the speed to escape before enemies could react. The urgency was not only technological rivalry, but the symbolic need to demonstrate that the USSR could still imagine and build the impossible. The Tu-160 would be the response, the materialization of an empire that refused to accept second place. The project. With the green light, Tupolev's engineers dove into the task of creating the most advanced bomber the Soviet Union had ever dared to imagine. The project, known internally as Product 70, went through dozens of revisions until it reached a concept that looked like something out of science fiction. A heavy bomber with variable geometry wings, sustained supersonic speed, and intercontinental range. The foundation of the aircraft would be a sleek, aerodynamically refined body, with wings that could adjust mid-flight. At lower speeds, extended wings would provide greater lift and stability for takeoffs and cruise flight. At supersonic speeds, the wings would sweep back, forming a thin, aggressive profile, like blades slicing through the sky. The engines would be another defining factor. The design called for the Kuznetsov NK-321, one of the most powerful turbofan engines ever installed in a military aircraft. With afterburners engaged, each of the 4 engines could generate 25,000 kilograms of thrust. Together, they propelled the Tu-160 beyond Mach 2, around 2,200 kilometers per hour, with a range of up to 14,000 kilometers without refueling. For comparison, that range allowed it to take off from Saratov, cross the Atlantic, launch missiles at the United States East Coast, and return, all without landing on foreign soil. Inside the cockpit sat 4 crew members: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, and weapons operator. They sat side by side in armored capsules. The cockpit, initially analog, was packed with instruments and redundancies, a necessity for missions lasting more than 10 hours under extreme conditions. Its payload was equally impressive, up to 45 tons of weaponry. The Tu-160 was designed to carry Kh-55 cruise missiles with nuclear warheads, and later the more advanced Kh-101 and Kh-102, with precision guidance and ranges of up to 5,500 kilometers. The missiles were stored in 2 internal rotary launchers, keeping the fuselage clean and harder to detect by radar. Structurally, the Tu-160 was a colossus of engineering, over 54 meters in length, 60 meters of wingspan when fully extended, and a maximum takeoff weight of 275 tons. Its construction used state-of-the-art titanium and aluminum alloys, with specific sections treated to reduce thermal and radar signatures. The investment in the project was enormous. At the time, each unit was estimated to cost between 250 and 300 million United States dollars, a figure comparable to the Soviet space program. Nothing was cheap, nothing was simple, but every bolt and weld had a purpose: to bring to life something the world would never forget, and that was about to become reality. On December 18, 1981, the wait ended. The first Tu-160 prototype took off from Zhukovsky Air Base, breaking the silence in solemn fashion. The Soviet skies, long accustomed to the deep rumble of the Tu-95, now heard a different roar, cleaner, fiercer, more controlled. The White Swan had taken flight. In the following years, test flights intensified. The aircraft proved stable in all phases of flight, with performance exceeding expectations in speed, range, and maneuverability for an aircraft of its size. The Soviet Air Force was both impressed and relieved. For the first time, they had in their hands a bomber capable of rivaling what the Americans called invulnerable. The Tu-160 was not only fast, it was eerily quiet in its operational mode. Even while flying at supersonic speeds, its radar signature was surprisingly low for an aircraft of its size. The fuselage design, combined with the absence of external weapon mounts, made it difficult to track by conventional radar stations. In simulated missions, it revealed its true vocation, flying at high altitudes, crossing enemy airspace undetected, and launching cruise missiles hundreds, even thousands, of kilometers from the target. It was a long-range strike vector, conceived for a scenario where the world could collapse into nuclear war in mere minutes. By the late 1980s, the first Tu-160s were officially incorporated into the Soviet arsenal, designated as Strategic Immediate Response Assets. The Engels Air Base in southwestern Russia became their main home. Each aircraft was treated as a piece of strategic gold, kept under constant surveillance, with pilots exhaustively trained and missions carefully monitored. When NATO fighters picked up a Tu-160 on radar, a rare occurrence, they were immediately dispatched for interception, but often they found nothing. It was as if the White Swan chose when it wanted to be seen and when it preferred simply to vanish. Behind the scenes, stories circulated of Soviet pilots proud to fly it, yet also deeply aware of the responsibility they carried. They knew they were at the controls of the aircraft that symbolized the final option, the last move before total darkness. The Tu-160 was no longer just a response to the B-1. It had become something different, a symbol of reach, precision, and total deterrence. And so it began to enter the imagination of militaries worldwide as a white ghost, too real to ignore, too lethal to provoke. But the glory of the Tu-160 had barely begun when the unthinkable happened. The outcome. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The empire that had poured billions into its construction, that dreamed of global hegemony and built flying machines as instruments of deterrence, simply ceased to exist. The White Swan project, once a symbol of supremacy, became an unbearable burden for a newborn country plunged into crisis. Production, once accelerated, came to an abrupt halt. Of the more than 100 units initially planned, only 36 were ever completed, many still at prototype stage or left unfinished. The production line in Kazan slowed to a crawl and then stopped completely. Several aircraft already assembled were left without a future. Worse still, part of the operational fleet was inherited by Ukraine, which came to control 19 Tu-160s, lacking the resources to maintain them, and under pressure from international agreements, Kiev dismantled most of them. Others were eventually returned to Russia years later as part of bilateral deals. The Tu-160, which was meant to be the pinnacle of Soviet military engineering, became a bitter reminder of what might have been. The few operational units went years without meaningful upgrades. Missions became sporadic, almost symbolic. The giant survived, but only as a relic of an empire that no longer existed. The price paid by the legend was high, not in combat, but in abandonment, neglect, and forced obscurity. And yet the White Swan endured. In silence, it waited. It knew its time would come again, and every time one took off, NATO scrambled to react immediately. In 2017, an almost mythological tale among pilots gained traction over the Sea of Japan. Two F-35s, the most modern and expensive fighters of the United States, were ordered to intercept a Tu-160 flying in international waters. For the Americans, it was supposed to be routine, just another escort and surveillance mission. But it wasn't. The F-35 Lightning II, known simply as Lightning II, is the most advanced 5th-generation fighter ever produced in the West. Stealthy, multi-role, and packed with integrated sensors, it was designed to be practically invisible to radar, operating in missions of air superiority, ground attack, and reconnaissance. It reaches a maximum speed of Mach 1.6, and although it is not the fastest aircraft, it compensates with technology, onboard electronics, and seamless integration with allied defense systems. And it was precisely against this machine, a symbol of cutting-edge Western technology, that the White Swan revealed its true strength. With a single command, the wings of the Tu-160 swept back, the four NK-321 engines unleashed their full power, and in seconds, the nearly 200-ton aircraft accelerated until it vanished beyond the horizon. The F-35s tried to follow, but they quickly realized the limitations of their own systems. The Tu-160 sustained a speed close to Mach 2 for more than 45 minutes, while the American fighters, agile and stealthy as they were, could only maintain such performance for brief moments before exhausting their fuel. This episode demonstrated that even after decades of neglect, the Tu-160 still carried something greater than numbers or statistics. It was not merely a Cold War machine, it was an unsettling reminder that the past still flew. And whenever the White Swan crossed the skies, even the most advanced aircraft of the West had to admit its limits. It was not just a heavy machine from the Soviet era, it was a reminder that certain weapons never lose their relevance. And it was not the only time the White Swan exposed this reality. In 2007, 2 units crossed the North Atlantic and were intercepted by British and Norwegian fighters, rekindling Cold War memories. The following year, in 2008, Moscow sent 2 Tu-160s all the way to Venezuela in a demonstration of global reach that surprised even Western analysts. They flew more than 10,000 miles, proving that Russia still possessed strategic tools to project power anywhere on the planet. For NATO pilots, shadowing a Tu-160 meant more than simply monitoring an intruder. It meant confronting an aircraft that seemed to defy logic. Immense, elegant, fast, and lethal. Its rarity only added to the myth. There were not hundreds of them in the air like the American B-52s. There were only a few, but each unit carried a symbolic weight far beyond its numbers. In that encounter of 2017, when the F-35s had to pull back in the face of its speed and range, it became evident that the Cold War may have ended, but the White Swan, like a ghost from another time, still flew. In the 1990s, many believed the Tu-160 was doomed to become nothing more than a museum piece, a relic of a Soviet Union that no longer existed. But Russia had other plans. The White Swan would not be forgotten. It would be reborn. The process began slowly in the early 2000s with the upgrade of several units to the Tu-160M standard. New navigation systems, digital avionics, encrypted communications, and more modern weaponry were installed. It was an attempt to extend the life of a project that, despite its age, still had unique characteristics no other country could replicate. But it was only in 2015 that the definitive leap occurred. Vladimir Putin signed the order to reactivate the production line in Kazan and launch the Tu-160M2 program. The goal was ambitious, to build at least 50 new units and modernize the 16 already in existence. For a country under pressure from sanctions and economic limitations, it was almost an impossible challenge. But Moscow wanted to make it clear that it still mastered the art of strategic bombing. The new model received NK-3202 engines, more efficient, with extended service life, capable of increasing its range by up to 1,000 kilometers. Its radar was upgraded to detect low-signature targets, including stealth aircraft. Special coatings were applied to critical sections of the fuselage, reducing reflection against enemy radar. In addition, state-of-the-art electronic warfare and communication systems transformed the giant into an airborne command center. But perhaps the most symbolic change was in the armament. The Tu-160M2 no longer limited itself to carrying nuclear cruise missiles. It could also launch conventional precision versions, such as the KH-101, as well as new hypersonic weapons under development. There were even rumors that it might carry long-range air-to-air missiles like the R-37M, becoming capable of hunting enemy fighters and shooting down support aircraft long before they closed in. This rebirth did not go unnoticed. In February of 2024, Vladimir Putin made a point of flying personally in a modernized Tu-160, a symbolic gesture that echoed around the world. It was more than a show of force. It was a clear message that Russia still knew how to resurrect its ghosts. Today, the Tu-160M2 represents more than a bomber. It is a flying fortress, capable of striking, enduring, and asserting itself on the modern battlefield. It has moved from an echo of the past to a bridge between two eras, the Soviet past and the future of Russian strategic aviation. And that is the true legacy of the White Swan, a plane born to be a response, which survived the collapse of its empire and re-emerged decades later as the uncomfortable reminder that some legends never die. In 2025, the Tu-160 still holds the title of the fastest bomber in operation in the world. No other aircraft in active service combines size, payload, range and speed in a single platform. For that reason, it remains a key pillar of Russia's doctrine for global power projection. But time does not stand still. The future of Russian strategic aviation already has a name, PAKDA. This next-generation stealth bomber is being designed to, in the long term, replace the Tu-160, the Tu-95, and the Tu-22M3. Unlike the White Swan, which bets on speed and brute power, the PAKDA adopts the stealth flying wing concept, with a subsonic profile focused on low detectability. It promises a range of up to 12,000 kilometers, an endurance of 30 hours, and the capacity to carry about 30 tons of weaponry, including nuclear and hypersonic missiles. Originally slated to enter service around 2027, the PAKDA already faces significant delays. Analysts believe its entry into active service will likely occur in 2030, or perhaps later, due to technical and financial difficulties. Remember, the arms race never stopped, and the Swan exists because on the other side of the coin, an American colossus also showed its face, the B-2 Spirit, the $2 billion bomber. If you ever see it, don't worry, you're probably not the target. I'll tell you more about it in 5 seconds in the next video.